What's up, Hoosier Nation? Back with another episode of the Rock Report. The Indiana Hoosiers are currently 8-0 in the season. They're rising. Cignetti's rising. That whole program is rising. Just coming off a win versus UCLA. It's 56-6. UCLA had 3 games in a row where they won with that new staff with Tim Skipper and co. Um, but Cignetti shut that down. He treated that like it was going to be a top game of the season. And you kind of heard him speak a little bit, Sean. And, he didn't take this team lightly, neither the team. That's kind of what happens. They came into Bloomington, got 50 balled. But we're on 8-0, Sean. Let's talk a little bit about the Hoosiers.
Yeah, coming off of a big win against UCLA, not a team to be, overlooked. UCLA was pretty hot coming into this game. Tim Skipper obviously taking over, came out swinging after they fired the pretty much entire play calling staff there. Cignetti came out hot, beat the piss out of him. And off of a big week, a lot of noise around this Hoosier program lately. It seems like Curt Cignetti's handled that noise very well, made sure that his players handle that noise as well. Indiana up to number 2 in the AP poll currently, the highest ranking ever in program history and maintained over the past couple weeks. Couple of these statistics from the season so far. Points per game, 43.9. That's fourth nationally. Also fourth nationally, 11.6 points allowed per game. The margin of victory is absolutely massive for this Hoosier football team. And it seems like the offense is dominating, the defense is dominating, special teams are very, very clean. This is a team that I really can see making a great playoff run this year, competing for a national championship. It's really just a matter of, what happens over the next really 5 to 6 weeks with the end of the season and the Big Ten championship game.
I know. I'm looking forward to the end of the season. These next couple of weeks, the Hoosiers are on a pretty clear path to, that 12-0 record, which is kind of crazy to say, Sean. We were there. We had some tough times. I think we almost flipped that and went 0-12 one year, but not quite. But 12, it's pretty impressive to see. Top 5 offense, top 10 defense. They are thin across the board, and we saw a little bit of in that UCLA game. I think that Aiden Fisher and Macau Kamara game, like I think they were just holding them out for much of that game, just a little bit more rest. Uh, but total offense, almost 600 yards a game. This is definitely the team to beat. And, I'm not going to start saying, it's the number 1 team in the country. I think Ohio State kind of holds that right to be the number 1 team in the country for now. They won the national championship last year. They're undefeated as well. A couple teams to watch, though. Texas A&M did look pretty good last night. Going to be really interesting to see what happens in this postseason. Obviously, we're going to focus on that 9th game first, so Hoosiers can go 9-0. But it's going to be pretty interesting. Obviously, it's going to be a very exciting season for the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, talking about the injuries a little bit, obviously we saw, a couple guys come out yesterday. You saw Mikal Kamara. He ended up being okay, went back into the game. Aiden Fisher sat out essentially half of that football game yesterday, had a brace on his knee. That is an injury I'm going to tell Hoosier fans, pay close attention to. I think this is a guy that's really a game changer for the Hoosiers, obviously the leader of the defense, the quarterback of that defense. In terms of depth on the linebacker side, you've got a couple guys that have been around for a good bit in Caden Turner and Jeff Utzinger. I expect one of the two to step up in that position here over the next couple weeks. Also, some young talent as well. But, we'll see how that injury plays out. I would assume the rest of the way here, you're probably going to be pretty light in terms of, making sure that whoever is hurt, you're going to hold out as much as you can to make sure they're good for, Big Ten championship and playoffs. Across the board on the other side of the football, pretty healthy so far on the offense. No major pieces, that we've seen missing. On the defensive side, though, Kellen Wyatt went out last week. You saw a couple of the young guys step up, but when it comes to that position, that's that kind of flex D end outside linebacker type position, very, very hard to play. So when you put young guys into those situations, a lot of times their reads aren't as great. And I think you saw Isaiah Jones and Aiden Fisher this week step up and really cover the entire football field. You saw that interception from Fisher at the start of the football game, a great read. It almost seemed as if he knew exactly where the play was going. But really, one of the big injuries yesterday that's probably overlooked by a lot of Hoosier fans is Brendan Frankie went down with an apparent hip injury. In terms of the past couple seasons, we've seen Hoosier kickers across the board just about every single one of them has struggled with a little bit of hip injury. So kind of my analysis on that is either we've got one of two issues, right? We're either over kicking guys or the way they're training is not conducive to the way they're kicking. So that's one small piece that I expect, Curt Cignetti and crew to clean up over this offseason. But going forward, I would expect Quinn Warren to step up at the kickoff spot. And then from field goal depth, things get short real quickly, right? So Brendan Frankie was the deep field goal guy so far this year. So I would expect, to push the limits of Nico Radicic and then, pay attention to going forward on fourth down here later in the year.
Yeah, this team is full of dogs, and especially I really want to highlight Fernando Mendoza and Alberto. That QB room, Grant Wilson, all those guys, they push each other to become better every single day. Fernando's up to 24 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, 27 on the year. Guy throws over 70% completion rate. And the thing that really, really stands out to me is when you hear him talk. I mean, this guy sounds like a robot. Like, he is just so laser focused on actual football. And when you hear someone ask him a question, the way he brings up his teammates, the way he kind of pulls everyone into the picture, he'll get a question asked about himself, and then immediately he'll revert that question and be like, it wasn't me, it was a wide receiver. And having that leader, having that guy at the helm, it's really shown how important that quarterback position is. And it's really impressive to see what he's done coming out of Columbus and Miami, getting to this level. I mean, everyone's Heisman Mendoza. Everyone's talking about that. Top 5 pick. We get scouts of the game. It's really impressive to see. And best of luck to him the rest of the way.
Yeah, when we talk about Mendoza, this past week, kind of the highlight on Twitter was that there were scouts from the New York Jets at the football game. I think when you look at the top few picks, the Jets, the number 2 pick this year, I think that would be a great fit for Mendoza. They don't really have a quarterback. Aaron Glenn, new to being a head coach coming out of the Detroit Lions program last year. I think really Mendoza's a guy you want to use as a catapult for your organization. I would expect him to end up in a place that's struggling right now, but trying to use a guy like Fernando Mendoza to catapult the organization to the next level, develop a young quarterback. You take a look today at the Patriots, right? Drake May stepped up big time in his second year, coming off of a good year last year. Mendoza's going to fit in somewhere, and I think quickly will become a system type quarterback. You talk about a guy like Tom Brady, who's a pretty good comparison to Mendoza, but Mendoza has legs, right? His reads are very, very clean. He makes the right throws, but he also can run. So being a dual threat guy that's, also a great, great, great quarterback, a great leader, a great speaker. That's really all you want in an organization, right? You want a guy like that leading your team, leading your organization. I think the way he's taken over this Hoosier locker room and shown that leadership, it's apparent through every interview with every player on this football team. But as we kind of get down the board, there's a couple other guys I want to highlight. Elijah Surratt and Aiden Fisher being the other two guys that, came in from Curt Cignetti's JMU team and have stepped up to tremendous, tremendous amounts. Aiden Fisher, obviously leading that defense, Elijah Surratt leading that receiver corps, but guys that are very well spoken, great, great ambassadors for Indiana University. I think that's one thing I've really appreciated so far about this football team is the guys in the media are great ambassadors for the program and for the university. I think when times get hard in years past where Indiana struggled a little bit or we've got a ton of transfers on the football team, it's very hard sometimes when guys are getting interviewed for them to really talk about the program, the culture. And I think when it comes to Curt Cignetti's football team, the culture is very, very apparent, right? Winning is all that matters. If it's not conducive to winning, we're not going to do it. And I think that this is spreading like wildfire across college football because they're seeing the success that it has.
And speaking of winning, Sean, we've seen, James Franklin, Deshaun Foster, Billy Napier, Brian Kelly, all these coaches, just getting fired. And there's a lot of openings around college football. And I want you to talk a little bit about how important, the school has gone all in on football and how important that Curt Cignetti's new contract is.
Yeah, when we talk about this administration within Indiana University, when Pam Whitten came in, it was very apparent she wanted to shift the culture of Indiana's football team. Indiana had been a basketball school for many, many years. She wanted to change that. I think she understood that the revenue driver is primarily football. When you have a good football team, your university flourishes. Scott Dolson has been absolutely incredible so far. I think bringing Curt Cignetti in, one of the major wins of his career as the athletic director, but continuing to make sure that the key pieces surrounding Curt Cignetti stay around this program is very, very apparent as well. Cignetti last week announced a new deal, one of the biggest deals in college football history, an 8-year, $92.8 million deal in the midst of talks of Curt Cignetti going to Penn State. Dolson and Pam Witten stepped up big time, averaging $11.6 million per year. That's top 10 amongst all FBS coaches, with a $56.7 million buyout. Essentially, this is guaranteeing that if there is anything that happens over the next 10 years, Curt Cignetti is going to be the football coach at Indiana, right? No matter who gets fired, no matter what job opens up, Curt Cignetti's locked in, right? Curt Cignetti is locked in Indiana for the rest of his career. He spoke about wanting to retire as an Indiana football coach. And I think the biggest piece now is making sure these assistant coaches stay at Indiana. Within his contract, there is a clause that states that Indiana has to essentially make their best effort to remain competitive when it comes to the assistant coach's salary pool. We saw this past season, Derek Owings, the strength coach, tried to get nabbed by USC. Indiana stepped in, made sure that they, upped their offer to him, kept him around. When it comes to Shanahan and Haynes after the season, I guarantee somebody will be coming for these guys. Obviously, great young coaches in college football, a lot of these young pieces that surround them as well. I think if Indiana can keep those guys around, you will see this sustained success for Curt Cignetti at Indiana.
We kind of saw like the Tom Allen era, kind of one of the things that really affected that program was not being able to kind of keep those coordinators, a lot of turnover in that position. But Cignetti took over a 3-9 football team. They're 8-0, ranked number 2 in the country. He has done an amazing job at Indiana. Let's kind of look a little bit more through the rest of the season. The next game coming up, Indiana's playing Maryland, then they're off to Penn State, who's having a down year, and that was supposed to be the next big game this year, compared to that at Oregon game. Then Wisconsin, and of course Purdue. Um, Sean, we obviously know in these games, and being there, Cignetti's kind of probably practice is going to look a little different. A lot more film and a lot less hitting in practice. Kind of get in and out just to keep. It's the last 4 games of the season. You got to keep those guys healthy. Now we're not talking about 12-game seasons anymore. We're talking about 15, 16 games playing, which is pretty impressive for the Hoosiers. So a lot goes into that. How do we get these players through the rest of the season and not overlooking, the main goal is obviously beating Maryland, as that's the next game.
Yeah, as we talk through the rest of the schedule, Maryland obviously being the first opponent, Mike Locksley has done very, very well with the Maryland program that he inherited. They've been a pretty consistent bowl team. They always have really, really good skill players, some pretty notable guys being drafted over the past few years, especially at positions like receiver and defensive back. I think that's a game where really it's going to come down to how can we control their skill players, right? Indiana is, having a little bit of issues with depth already popping up. In terms of keeping guys healthy, I think the practice schedule is going to kind of dictate how that plays out. But as we get into the next few weeks, right, you take a look at Penn State, a Penn State team that lost their head coach, that's essentially struggling to find their identity for the rest of the season, and their quarterback out for the year. As we get into the following week, the Wisconsin football team they're going into play, I'm not sure Luke Fickell is going to be the head coach of that Wisconsin football team at that point, right? So you get into those 3 weeks and then Purdue, you're talking about 4 football teams that really are struggling so far this season, right? Definitely not great football teams, but when it comes to Big Ten play, there is always going to be, the chance that a team comes in and plays very, very well, right? So can't overlook any of these football games. Obviously, talks coming out about, Big Ten championship and playoffs. But the reality of the Big Ten is, unless you play the caliber of football that Indiana has played the past 8 weeks on a consistent basis, you can win or lose any football game, right? You talk about teams that have essentially laid an egg. Take a look at Ohio State a few years back, losing to Purdue, right? These aren't unheard of, right? So Indiana maintaining that level of play, that level of confidence, and not overlooking or being overconfident is really going to be the key over the next few weeks to getting to 12-0, getting to the Big Ten championship game.
In Indiana, that offense, you always talk about defense wins championship, but that offense is averaging over 3 points a drive, which is pretty impressive. Every time they're on the field, they come off with points. The key is finish strong, those 4 games. is, gonna, especially on the defense side of the ball, the offense is gonna do what they're gonna do, and the defense has been outstanding all year. But it's really just the depth on the defense. The depth on the defense is kind of the Achilles heel of this program. And obviously, the Brian Haynes and co, they're getting the guys ready. They obviously probably don't think that. As an outsider, I'm not too sure. There's definitely some guys on that team that we haven't heard their name come up. But if their name was called, I'm sure they hold their own. They are at the end of the day, they are Big Ten recruits and Indiana football recruits. And Curt Cignetti and co definitely recruited well in the offseason, especially in the transfer portal as well. But looking forward to the season prediction, Sean, I think like it's pretty crazy to think that 12 and 0 is on the table. That is not an unheard of prediction. That is what the books say, that is what the analytics say, that their Indiana Hoosiers are predicted to win the next 4 games.
Yeah, I think when we take a look at the odds the rest of the year, obviously the odds are in favor of Indiana being a 12-win football team. Obviously, we hope that that's the case. As we talked about some of these job openings, getting into a little bit of the coaching carousel right now, pretty busy. We saw this afternoon Brian Kelly was fired from the LSU job, obviously sending major shockwaves through the SEC, as that's a team that, in the past decade has won a national championship. So far, some of the main Power Four openings, we got the LSU Tigers, Penn State Nittany Lions, Florida Gators, Arkansas Razorbacks, Oklahoma State Cowboys, and the Stanford Cardinal, obviously led by GM Andrew Luck. I think as we take a look at what's going to unfold over the next 2 months in the coaching carousel, some of the big names to watch out for, top of the list for most teams is going to be Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes, right? These are essentially hot names. These are guys that have done very, very well and have proved that they can, run half of the show. Can they run a football team as a whole? That's to be determined, right? I think Indiana has, what they need in terms of a national championship staff. And I think the importance of keeping them around is very, very high. But when it comes to some of these jobs, Indiana can't compete with a Power Four school head coaching job for their OC, right? Other than those two guys, some of the top available names that I would expect to see. I think Mike Norvell is a guy that could move if the time fits. Lane Kiffin, obviously, anytime an SEC job opens up, his name's going to be in the mix. Urban Meyer, always rumored to go wherever. I think he's going to stick with TV. But two names that I really think are going to make a shockwave over the next few weeks and likely into the next couple months with a lot of these jobs. Alex Golish at USF. I think that's a guy that I expect to take over a major program. And then GJ Kenny at UTSA. Ricky, give me kind of some of your thoughts on this coaching carousel and what you see taking place over the next couple months.
Next couple months, one of the big names, if you're looking at, I mean, even not even coaches, but kind of one quarterback that stands out, and he's going to probably leave with his offensive coordinator, is Metanemer, if I mispronounced that last name, over at North Texas. He's a guy. He threw over 600 passing yards this past week. He's going to leave in the offseason, get his 1.25 whatever $1 million from some Power 4 program, and he's taking his offensive coordinator with him. But a real big thing, I think you're going to start seeing, Lane Kiffin, a big thing with him is, that Florida job is open. Lane Kiffin is the talker. You hear him all week. He was chirping those Oklahoma players all over TV. But he is a talker. He came out and said something, how he is like addressing his team in a way where he wasn't taking the Florida job, but at the same time we saw Cignetti, he's like, I'm staying. I'm going to sign this contract under the table, and I'm going to stay at Indiana. And so those kind of guys like that, Mike Norvell, Lane Kiffin, if they truly were going to stay in the position that they were in, you would probably hear kind of in these next coming weeks, they're going to sign those deals. Alex Golish, and I kind of talked about this early in the season as USF went on that 3-run season to start the 3-game run and start that season. He is a mastermind on the offensive side of the ball. Used to coach at Tennessee, where they kind of really invented that space pace race offense. That is a wide offense. They are fast, physical. Alex Golish is definitely the name to look at. I think he is the next big thing in college football. But buyouts and collectives have really turned college football, so it's a coaching arms race. Indiana deal, it sets Indiana up for the future. And while everyone else, is going to spend the offseason looking to replace their guys, Indiana, has a big picture. Recruits know, that's the thing. You see James Franklin fired. all those recruits decommitted. So you kind of have Indiana set it up for the big picture. They're keeping Cignetti. Uh, they have their guy that they're going to roll with, and it's you're just going to shake up everything with this big coaching carousel.
Yeah, when we talk about this Indiana football team, obviously eyeing 12-0, 8-0 so far this season, one of the greatest starts in the history of Indiana football. Obviously hoping for one of the greatest ends to a season in Indiana football. But a huge thank you, to Pam Witten and Scott Dolson for really getting this deal done, keeping this Curt Cignetti staff around, hopefully for many, many years to come. And really, our outlook on the rest of this year is obviously very, very positive. But, there's pieces that we covered today, things to watch throughout, this football team and throughout college football that could have an effect on, how the history of this Indiana football team plays out and how the history of the Curt Cignetti regime plays out. But I've got a lot of trust in, those running the show at Indiana. And I really think that, from a game to game standpoint, I think the way this Indiana team is operating, they're not letting any of that outside noise affect anything having to do with the football games when it comes to, Curt Cignetti getting a new job, Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman, any of, the coaches getting nabbed by other schools. I really think Indiana and Curt Cignetti does a very good job of handling that. And yeah, just very excited to watch the rest of this year play out.
Sean, Indiana keeps it rolling. Cignetti got paid. Coaching carousel is spinning faster than ever, and the Hoosiers are on a roll, 8-0. Looking forward to the rest of the season. It's going to be great year for the Rock Report, great year for Indiana football. Appreciate all the fans who tune into the games, tune into the podcast, kind of helps support us. Really awesome to see us grow.
Yeah, big thank you to everyone for always listening, taking note of all the crazy stuff we say on Twitter. And as we get into, this later third of the season, obviously great, great big hopes for Indiana and the players. Hopefully Fernando Mendoza becomes, the Heisman from Indiana. But yeah, thank you guys again for listening. And as always, go Hoosiers.
A quick question, Sean.
Yep.
Where would you put the Fernando Mendoza statue if he were to win Heisman in Bloomington?
I think when we talk about where to put it, we're going to have to start to look at how many statues go in that north end zone. Obviously, we've got George Talafero up there right now, but Mendoza Heisman would put him up there. I think Curt Cignetti is eyeing down a spot right next to his parking spot over there next to the practice field. And then if all goes as planned, Scott Dolson's got to be in the mix as well, right?
Exactly. That's another episode of the Rock Report. Appreciate you fans for tuning in. Have a great day.